Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Popa, your host for this summit, for the NLP Master Summit. And right now, I'm super excited to have with us none other than Jamie Smart, who is one of the most known practitioners and coaches and expert in the world of hypnosis. He's been doing and teaching hypnosis for many, many, many years, and he's a Sunday Times best-selling author. He's also the author of Clarity, a book which has helped so many, many people in the world of personal development, coaching, and self-help. So let's welcome Jamie Smart. Jamie, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Eugene. And the the title for my session today is The Principles Behind Transformational Change. And and the reason I called it that, just to backtrack a bit, back in 1998, I became fascinated with how do people change? Like, how do they really make changes? And that's what got me to the field of NLP, got me fascinated with NLP and hypnosis. So I built my first company, Salad, and we did NLP and hypnosis cards. And I loved NLP and hypnosis, loved teaching it, loved using it, all that sort of stuff. And then in 2008, I got to the point where my business was very successful. I was taking a mini retirement, a 3 month ski holiday, 2008, not
Yeah.
1998, 2008, 3 month ski holiday. And I wasn't happy and I couldn't figure it out because according to the rules of my industry, I should be super happy. I should be feeling great and amazing and that sort of thing. And I wasn't. So I went back to the drawing board and I hired a coach, spent $60,000 on a coach.
What?
And what I realized was that I'd been operating on a fundamental misunderstanding was that my that what I was looking for in terms of happiness, peace of mind, security, fulfillment, well-being, feeling of successfulness, love, all that stuff, that those things could be accomplished by achieving goals out in the world. Now, I got nothing against goals. I love setting and achieving goals, but the first realization I had was, oh, everything you've been looking for outside of you is actually already there within you.
Yeah.
You've already got it. Now that immediately changed how I kind of related to myself and what was important and all of
Hmm.
that sort of stuff. And then as I continued exploring, so this is like early 2009, I had another realization, which was everything, the fact that a person can even see or hear or feel or perceive means that they have the source of innate resilience and well-being and clarity already there within them. They already have innate mental health. Now, from the field of NLP, I'd learned that the presupposition that people have all the resources they need already there within them, and the creators of NLP said, look, this isn't true, but they're beliefs that if you adopt them, it can be more, you can be a more effective communicator, more effective at creating change. Well, what I suddenly realized is, oh no, this is a truth. This is something that's true about human beings. Now, here's the
Yeah.
funny thing, Eugene. At the time, I was speaking to one of my coaches about this, and he said, well, the thing is, Jamie, he said, these are principles, these are underlying facts
Hmm.
about reality. And I said, don't give me that because at the time I'd spent the previous 10 years, like 1998 to 2008, basically mastering conversational belief change. That was my
Yeah.
thing, was changing people's beliefs using sleight of mouth and that sort of thing in the course of ordinary conversation. And so when this guy said to me, look, there are fundamental truths, fundamental principles underlying the human experience, I was like, don't give me that. They're just beliefs. They're just beliefs. I
Okay.
said, here's the fact of the matter. People can believe anything and experience it as true. You know, what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. People can believe anything and experience it as true. So don't tell me it's facts. And he said, well, you've got a point there. He said, people can believe anything and experience it as true. He said, but the fact that people can believe it, that they can think anything and believe it is true, experience it as true, that's a fact, isn't it? That's not just a belief, that's a fact. And I was like, holy shit, he's right. He's right, that's a fact. So I started looking for what if there really are truths, what if there really are facts behind the human experience. So the first one I saw was, oh, everything you've been looking for outside of you is already there within you. Second one I realized was the fact that a person can even see or hear, feel, perceive means they have that innate source of resilience and well-being and clarity already there within them. Well, that transformed how I worked with clients, you know. I suddenly became extremely hopeful. You know, it's funny. I ran a poll in one of my groups that had lots of coaches and therapists and NLPers and change workers in it. And I asked this question. I said, what do you believe is the number one thing that would make the biggest difference to how much impact you have in the lives of your clients, how much transformational impact you're able to have in the lives of your clients? And so the number one thing that like loads of people voted for was confidence. If I had more confidence in my abilities, then I'd be able to have a bigger impact. Bottom of the list with one vote from me was confidence in my client's innate capacity for resilience, realization, and transformation. See, the thing that I've realized and that has made such a difference to me as a coach, as a change worker, as a therapist, as a trainer, is I suddenly realized, oh, they've already got it. They truly do have that source of resilience, realization, and transformation already there within them.
And many times the clients, they'd actually come and say, I'm sure you've encountered this many times, that the client comes to you with an issue or the problem they want to solve, but they don't believe it can be solved.
Oh yeah, all the time.
So how do you operate then?
Well, that's almost always how I operate. Like I'm working on the basis that when a client first comes to me, they've tried everything they can think of.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, you know, Eugene, a lot of times the most challenging, the things that have been most challenging for people and that have them come to me or a coach or whatever is the things that are based on the idea that there's something wrong with them, you know, that they lack confidence or that they lack lovability or that they're not enough in some way. And what you'll usually find is that when someone, for instance, if we just take the idea that they're not enough, if someone comes to you with that belief, the idea that they're not enough, they've almost always been taught that at a very young age. They've almost always been taught it not directly. No one's turned to them and gone, you know, Johnny, you are not enough, or, you know, Susan, you're not quite enough. No, they've picked it up through implication, through presupposition, so in the ways people react. So it's a belief, but it's well, let me tell you a story.
Yes.
So I heard this, I can't remember who it was told me this. It was someone who had trained with Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson is one of my heroes. And they spent some time with Erickson and they said, you know what the interesting thing about Erickson was? They said he was decent with language and language patterns. He said, but he wasn't the best I've seen. You know, he was a bit clunky and stuff. He said he had amazing sensory acuity, but again, I've seen better. That wasn't his real gift. They said his real gift was you would sit down with this guy and he would get into rapport with you at the level of who you really are. So, you know, we'd been taught to get into rapport with people based on their breathing rate or, you know, at the level of behavior, you know, or at the level of, you know, energy levels or eye movements or whatever.
Making rapport, being on the same page.
Yeah, but they said, well, no, with Erickson, you sit down with this guy and it was like he's sending you a message on all channels saying, I see who you are. I know who you are. I see who you are. And I love who you are. Who you are is just fine with me. I don't need you to change a thing. So he'd be getting into this profound level of connection with the person at the level of identity. And the guy told me, he said, you know, bathed with this level of acceptance and love and appreciation, people would just relax, and then they would transform in alignment with their true nature, with their being. They would change like seemingly effortlessly. And I heard that story. And by the time I heard that story, you know, I'd been learning and teaching NLP for probably a decade. I heard that story and I was like, I want to learn to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's what I committed myself to exploring and learning. And that's what led me to, funnily enough, I'll share screen with you guys. That's what led me to what I call the principles behind transformational change. Because the thing that I found fascinating was, you know, I had lots of skills and techniques and things I could do, but sometimes they didn't work. You know, and then other times I'd be having a conversation with someone, we just have like a pretty ordinary conversation and they change. And I was like, well, what is that? What is that that's doing that? Outline of this session, introduction, my story. I already told you a bit of that. Well, I'll tell you a bit more of that.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about a different kind of communication skill and some crucial distinctions. Then we'll dive into the principles behind transformational change. So my story was, you know, I went on this journey with NLP, and then in 2008, I started exploring the stuff that I'm teaching now, and I did kind of a 180. I sold my NLP business. I started writing. I wrote my best-selling book, Clarity, which was a big bestseller. Ended up getting on the news, and then my book Results became a Sunday Times bestseller. The thing you can see at the top where it says the noise in my head nearly destroyed me was a reporter had been suffering with tinnitus for years, making life unlivable. She read my book, had an insight, and it all changed. So I'm telling you this because it's funny, Eugene, when I was doing NLP and hypnosis as my main kind of thing, people were off and on at me to, you know, why don't you write a book? Why don't you do something? But until I saw what I'm going to describe as the principles behind transformational change, I didn't really feel like I had anything to add. I didn't, you know, there had already been great NLP books written and that sort of thing. I didn't feel like I had something new to add. And then what I realized is, oh, I've been operating on a mistaken paradigm for who we really are and how our experience is created. So just to backtrack a bit, the third, in fact, I'll stop sharing for a second. So the third insight I had was in, first one, everything you've been looking for outside of you is already there within you. Yeah. All the love, all the peace of mind, all the security, all the well-being, all the fulfillment, it's already there. You've already got it. You've already got what you've been searching for. So that changed my own life. Second insight, the fact that a person can even see, hear, feel, perceive means they have that source of resilience, realization, and transformation already there within them. So that was a game changer for me. Third insight came in June of 2009. And I suddenly realized, oh, this stuff I'm exploring, this is principles. Principles like gravity is a principle. Yeah. Pre-existing facts of how the human experience is created and who we really are. And when that happened, I called up my office that day. I said, we're changing directions. We're leaving the field of NLP and hypnosis. There's principles for psychology. This is a new paradigm. So that's what I've been doing ever since. And I've been working on the basis that if this is principles, then they should be, there are three things that something needs in order to be principles. Number one, it's got to be predictive. So given the principles, you can make predictions in advance about what's going to happen. Number two, it's got to be explanatory. So given the principles, you can explain outcomes better than if you don't know the principles. And third, there's got to be a constant. And so one of the effects it's had, Eugene, is it's massively simplified my work. So where I've written here, what's true, we believe the most valuable things a person can discover are, number one, how their experience is being created moment to moment to moment, and number two, who they really are. And those are basically the two things when I go into doing a session, doing a piece of change work with someone, I go in kind of armed with those two things. And so this is going to sound kind of strange, but when I go into a session with a client, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going to go with them. I don't have a plan, but I have a general direction. And the general direction, Eugene, is I'm going to do my best to find my way into a connection with them. I want to get into a feeling of connection with them.
And how do you do that? I mean, it's
Well,
like
that's a good question.
everybody wants to know, it's like, what should I have to think about, or what should I have to focus on to feel like I'm actually seeing this person beyond their physical appearance? You know, I see their soul, not their body.
Beautiful. So the only way I know to do that, and this is what I teach people, is, well, I call it the calibration model. I'll show you. It's very simple.
Super.
Oh, well, I'll just tell it to you because I
Yeah.
can't find it. I'll just tell it to you. It's
No
only
worries.
got three. It's only got three parts, so it's very simple. The first part is calibration. So you wanna see what's going on and hear what's going on and feel what's going on for the other person. But you also want to calibrate yourself. So you want to see and hear and feel what's going on for you. So you want to be very, very present, very, very present to yourself and to the other person.
So you're walking a very fine line right there.
Very fine line. And then, but here's the interesting thing. The second part of it is what I call connection. So you want to find the purpose of calibration. And it's funny, my way of thinking about it, Eugene, is you want to get their world. You want to get what's going on for the other person. So the reason, the purpose for asking questions and finding out what's going on and calibrating is so you can get their world. You want to find out what their world is like. So the way I think about that is, I imagine that, like, if you imagine that a person's going through life, their world is the raft that they're going through life on. They're what we call in NLP their model of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, or their map of the world. Well, their map of the world is their embodied understanding of reality, and I want to find out about their map of the world. So I think of their map of the world as being like the raft they go through life on. And what I want to do is I want to find out about their map of the world so well that they would go, yeah, you get me. You get me. You understand me. So I want to get onto that raft with them. And then once I get them, once I get what's going on, I want to find out where the edges are. Where are the edges of that raft? And then once I know where the edges are, or one of the edges are, I'm going to grab them by the arm and we'll jump into the water together. And that water is the water of connection and possibility and insight. And what we find is we spend a little time there, and when they climb back on their raft, it's a different raft. It's a different shape. It's got different possibilities. Now, how do you do that? Well, the thing that's going to make that easy for a person to do, the thing that is going to make it easy for a coach or an NLP or a therapist to do, is you need to see it for yourself about yourself. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that what we call connection, which is, the experience of connection, the feeling of connection, is actually what it's like to be you when there's nothing else getting in the way.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's what it's like to be you when there's nothing getting in the way. And I'll take it one step further. the feeling of connection, when you feel that connection to another person, you're simultaneously feeling the connection to who you really are and to life itself. So you're what we describe as the feeling of connection, the experience of connection, is actually just the absence of interference. It's the absence of. Now, when people are in that connected space, it's very, very easy for them to make changes. It's very, very easy for them to have insights and realizations that wash away limiting beliefs and open up new possibilities. And my assertion is that when a hypnotherapist or an NLP or a therapist is doing a piece of work with someone and that person changes, it's because they've had insight and realization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because they've had and by insight and realization, I mean that their embodied understanding of life, their model of the world has been profoundly updated. Okay.
I just had an insight right now as you're saying this, and I think it just plays so beautifully, so beautiful. And the fact that having an insight actually means having the sight inside. It's like insight. So that's so
Oh
beautiful.
yeah.
You know, it's
It's
like
a
it's
strongly
not an outside, it's an insight.
bingo, bingo, and it comes from within.
Yeah.
It's not something that's assembled out of information. Like we can read information and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But for our embodied understanding of reality, our map of the world to be transformed in a way that changes our behavior and experience, that's got to come from within. And when I say within, I don't mean within your body or even within your brain. It comes uh, from from the essence of your being. It comes from the heart of your being. It comes from, you may have heard the idea of like the observer
Mm-hmm.
being the one who, or consciousness,
Yeah.
or our awareness. Well, it comes from within that. And my assertion is that source of insight and realization is your true nature and is everyone's true nature. Everyone in this world has that capacity for insight and realization within them, whether they believe it or not.
Yeah.
And that, you asked a great question, which is what happens when someone comes to you and they don't believe that they can be fixed or that the problem can be solved or whatever. Well, when that happens, the best thing I've got going for me is knowing for a fact that they have this capacity within them. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't need to believe it. Here's the interesting thing. I was working with a guy the other day, had some serious clinical diagnoses.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're working away, and I'm using the model I mentioned, the calibration model. So I'm finding out what's going on for this guy. So
Mm-hmm.
you'd recognize the kind of question, what would you like to have happen? And he tells me, I'm like, oh, well, how would you know if it had worked? And he tells me, and I'm like, oh, well, what do you make of that? Just regular kind of coaching questions,
Yeah.
following curiosity, getting his world, calibrating. We find our way into this deeper connected space. And so I'm on his raft with him, right? So calibration, connection. The third part of the model, third of three, calibration, connection, education. Now, the word education, I'm using it in the original Greek sense of the word, which was duce. I guess that's Latin.
Yeah.
Meaning out and duce to lead.
Mm-hmm.
So education was originally not about pushing information in. It was always about leading something out from within, bringing out what someone already has. So I see my job description, if you like, Yujin, is to help create the conditions to make it as easy as possible for my clients to have the insights and realizations that are going to make a difference in their life. So my job is to create the conditions for insight. So calibration and connection are getting us into an insight-friendly space.
Mm.
So I get on the raft with him. So I'm finding out from him, oh, he's had this diagnosis. And, oh, what do you make of that? What's going on? He's telling me about it. We find our way into this connected space. Now the word connection is kind of a misnomer because connection implies two separate things with something that joins them.
Yeah.
But how it looks to me is we're not actually separate. We're already connected. We're already connected. So I know, we're one. There's a quote. This may be a little too out there for some people, but there's a quote from Teilhard de Chardin. He said, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience, which I always liked, but now I see it a little differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
how I put it is we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're one spiritual being having 7 billion human experiences. And who you really are is that one spiritual being. Who you really are is consciousness itself. So an example might be like I've got a mobile phone, right?
Yeah.
And you've got a mobile phone, and everyone watching this probably has a mobile phone. So there are billions of mobile phones in the world, but only one internet. And the thing that animates all of them is that one internet. Well,
that's beautiful.
Similarly, there are billions of us human beings on the planet, but there's one consciousness, and we're all jacked into that one consciousness. And who you really are is that one consciousness. And that one consciousness is the source of clarity and resilience and well-being and insight and fresh new ideas and all that sort of stuff. So what I'm looking for with my clients is always for us to get closer to that source of fresh and new. And where we find that typically is when we find our way into that insight-friendly space. So that's what I did with him. So he and I find our way into that insight-friendly space together. And then he has an insight, and he realizes that despite all the diagnoses he's received, there's nothing wrong with him. And he's going to be okay. Like I didn't tell him that. He realized it. He suddenly caught a glimpse of the truth.
Yeah. And that's so beautiful and so well put, the client comes with a diagnosis. There's nothing wrong with him or her as a spiritual being in a physical embodiment. That's not the issue. It's more like the physical embodiment has something going on, but there's nothing wrong with him.
Well, here's the interesting thing about it, Eugen. Like, yeah, we have these physical bodies. So for instance, I could get a broken arm. And if I got a broken arm, it would probably really help me to go to the hospital and get it put in a cast and that sort of, that sort of thing. That would be really helpful. By the same token, some people have various neurological disorders and that sort of thing, or disorders. Maybe they're not even disorders, just different ways of operating. So for instance, I've long been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, but it doesn't look like a disorder to me. It just looks like a way of using my perception. Like I can be very, very focused as long as I'm interested in something.
Engaged. Yeah.
So, but here's where it gets interesting. A lot of times the diagnoses are based on a misunderstanding of who the person is and what they've got going for them. I'll give you an example. After I released my book, The Little Book of Clarity, which is like a concise version of my first book, Clarity, I would get, emails and letters from people saying how it had helped them. I got this one message from a U.S. Army veteran. And she wrote, she said, "Thank you, your book has changed my life." And I was like, "Oh, how so?" She said, "Well, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder 10 years previously." Yeah. She said, "I've been to every kind of therapist, different types of therapy and psychiatrists and psychologists. I've been put on medication, all kinds of different things. But no one ever told me that there was nothing wrong with me. No one ever told me that I was okay, that I may have these symptoms going on, but that those symptoms were just an expression of my understanding of something, and that you have this capacity to realize something new about yourself and your world at any moment. She said, I realize there's nothing wrong with me, and I've been fine ever since.
Yeah, and that's so difficult. I think that's probably like the most difficult thing a human being can, achieve, so to speak, because almost everyone goes around thinking I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, there's something wrong with me, whatever. It's like we for whatever reason we've been living in this culture thinking that we are having something wrong about ourselves. And it's been inflated with every commercial you see, with every ad you see, with every little things like, oh, you should look like this, or you should have this car. If you don't, then you suck, basically. There's something wrong with you. If you don't have these beliefs, then there's something wrong with you.
Well, and the interesting thing about that, Eugene, you're absolutely right. And it creates a dynamic, which is basically the dynamic of there's somewhere to get to, and there is better than here. Now,
Yeah.
in the physical world, that can be true. If I'm in the middle of a desert and I would really, really like to get a good dinner and a comfortable bed and some water for the night, a city 2 miles away may definitely be better than here in terms of food and water. But psychologically, the dynamic of there's something wrong with me, there's somewhere to get to, and there is better than here, is predicated on the idea that happiness and well-being comes from somewhere out there,
Yeah.
space and time. And the fact of the matter is, happiness is so natural for human beings, well-being is so normal for human beings that even babies can do it. And we live in a world where the prevailing narrative is that happiness and well-being and resilience and security are things that can be learned and developed, whereas they're innate capacities. I work with multimillionaires hire me to work with them on their businesses or on their well-being, and one of the things I discover is that people who have been operating often for decades in the hopes that once they had enough money, then they would feel secure, found out that that's a game without end, that it didn't work.
Yeah.
Because that's not where security comes from. Now, again, I got nothing against money, just like I got nothing against goals. But that feeling of security and well-being always and only ever comes from within. It can never come from the outside.
Yeah.
Only comes from within. Same with happiness, same with well-being, same with resilience. These are innate capacities, and we live in a world where we're in a semantic environment where we're told that it works in a way other than that. But it's not true. It's not
It's so
true.
beautiful. I had this conversation with Dr. John Gray, who's written so many books on relationships, and he says something so beautiful, which goes along the lines with what you just said about from within towards without. And he said in couples, the spouse is they are trying to get in a relationship so the other can make them happy. And he said, nobody can make you happy. You have to be happy, and then your partner can probably make you happier. But you have to be happy in the first place. It's like if you're not happy to start with, nobody can actually do that for you. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah, well, and I think that the where it gets really interesting is to look at what stops that. Because if we take babies again, little kids spend a lot of their time happy, having fun,
Hmm.
enjoyment, that sort of thing. And at that early age, they haven't been indoctrinated to the idea that happiness is dependent on things that are external and distant.
Yeah.
And the I read a quote by someone, I thought it was good. He said the ingredients for a happy relationship, two happy people.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a very simple ingredient. So
Yeah.
how can we get because nowadays everybody is more and more interested in the spiritual aspect, in the personal development aspect, and many a times I saw people who are kind of like falling in this spirituality trap, where there's this post the other day on Facebook where somebody said, I'm looking for a woman who is at least on the same level of awareness as I have, which is like, dude, if you say that, where is your awareness if you say that? Like thinking that your level of awareness is so high, and some others, would have a difficulty to get to your level. So how can people be, do it in such a way that they don't fool themselves, saying, I'm actually operating from my higher self, or I'm operating from that inner core of myself. Are there any ways that you can, any checks and balances you can put in place so that you won't really fool yourself thinking that?
There's a couple of things. Well, the first one is I think life puts a check and balance in, because I've never met anyone who is in a relationship with someone at a higher level than them. Like there's a way that people always, attract people at the same level. I had a friend actually who was always like, oh yeah, my girlfriend, she's really good, but she's just not at the same level as me. I'm like, yeah, I think you're actually you're incorrect about that. I think there's a built-in check and balance, and I
Yeah,
think a lot of times people confuse being able to, talk in a particular way
yeah,
with someone's level of understanding or level of consciousness. And, just because a person doesn't talk spiritual or something like that doesn't
yeah.
mean they're but in terms of, is there something you can learn, or some tips so you can avoid fooling yourself? Well, I think in any domain, the biggest trap is fooling yourself. There's that wonderful quote by the physicist Richard Feynman. He said,
Yeah,
something like, the 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 most important thing is not to fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool.
yeah,
And so that I think just knowing that we're all, uh, at the mercy of an ego that is always going to set out to try and fool ourselves, and the ego will always harness any gains in spiritual understanding and use it for its own devices. So it's worth being aware of that. But the other thing is to like, I think that there are two things that a person can discover for themselves. And if they discover those two things, they'll be much more difficult to fool. They'll be
hmm
much less likely to fall for their own PR, you know. And the first one is how experience is created. Now, I'm going to make this as an assertion, and this is actually one of the principles
yeah,
of transformational change. And and the way I would say it is that in every moment, we're living in the experience of a thought generated perceptual reality. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, as you know, our brains are sealed in a darkened container. Like there are no windows in the head.
yeah,
The brain is in a darkened room, okay? And then our senses are connected to the brain, but our senses, they're kind of like data ports, okay? Our eyes, our ears, they pour data, huge volumes of data into the brain. And then what happens within our neurological and sociological and spiritual properties is we take a guess. We go, what must be out there for me to be receiving this data? And
yeah,
we make a guess and we create a perceptual reality. Now, the perceptual reality you create is a best guess. So you've had this experience where you're walking down the street and you see one of your friends and you wave at them and they get a little closer and then you realize it isn't them. And you're like, oh, oops, mistake. Like That, or where you're walking down the street and you bump into a lamppost because you didn't see it. It wasn't in your perceptual reality. So we're creating this internally generated, real-time, moment-to-moment perceptual reality and relating to it as though it's an actual reality. And a lot of the time that's functional, it's useful, it gets us through the day. But we tend to operate as though we're looking out through little windows at our heads at a world that's already out there. We overlook the creative role
Yeah.
that we're taking in creating our perceptual experience. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. We're living in the feeling of that moment-to-moment thought-generated perceptual reality. So the feelings we're in, the emotional tone that we're in, the felt experience that we're in, is letting us know about that moment-to-moment process of perceptual reality creation. So I'll be working with a client and they'll say, I'm feeling really nervous because I've got a talk in 3 weeks. And it genuinely seems to them like that feeling of nervousness has something to do with the talk. Well, it doesn't. The talk's 3 weeks in the future. Like, there's no way that those feelings are coming back through time from the future. They're experiencing something that's being created real time from within their from within their system, and then they're part of that creative process is they create a mental object 3 weeks out in the future, out in space and time, and then they respond to that object as though it were a thing, as though it was something in present experience. Well, that's a trick of the mind, and that is a trick of the mind that's so powerful and subtle that we get hoodwinked by it.
And
Go on.
yeah, I was going to say, and what people don't understand is that that actually happens automatically, and you get the physical reactions and whatnot. But you can do the exactly same thing consciously and actually achieve the goals that you want to achieve if you have any goals.
Well, here's the funny thing, though. I'm going to suggest that regardless of what you do with it, even more powerful than doing something with it is understanding what's going on. Because I meet lots of people, I used to be in the imagine a future you want and then
Yes,
create a
yes.
business. But I myself didn't understand that my experience was being created real time from
Yeah.
within. I just didn't know that. And it looks to me like an insight into the fact that you're creating your experience real time from within, and that the trap of getting creating an external object and then relating to it as if it's the source of our experience, that's part of the human condition, and it trips all of us up on a regular basis. And yeah, it's the first of the 2 most valuable things a person can discover. And what I find, Eugene, is if someone has a realization about how their experience is being created, it can take, so much off their mind and have them evolving rapidly.
Yeah.
Because they discover that the things they had been afraid of were just mind-made hallucinations.
It's a very interesting study. I'm still trying to find that study again, but it was amazing. I was like, flabbergasted by the results. So what they did is they took scans. They were scanning people, and they said, think about yourself, and then they were measuring to see which areas of the brain would activate. And then they said, think of somebody close to you, my family member or whatnot, and then think of some other people. So every time they would think of someone themselves or somebody very close or some friends, different areas of the brain would activate. And then they were asked to think about themselves doing something in the future. So it's like the future you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the kicker. When they were thinking about the future you, the future them, it wasn't the same area of the brain which would get activated when they were thinking about themselves in the present. When they were thinking about themselves in the future, they were thinking as if they were thinking of somebody very close, like very close relative, but not themselves.
Interesting.
So that was like, what? So it's like you think about yourself in the future, it's actually another person, not you.
Well, let me give you the big kicker. When you think about yourself in the present, that's not you either.
Yeah, it's you in the
So
past, right?
I'll tell you a story. So my girlfriend has a dog called Jack, and every night when it gets dark, he catches sight of his reflection in the windows, and then he goes running down the room at high speed, barking, leaps into the air and attacks this image in the mirror, and then he falls to the ground and dusts himself off. And for the first year, I would watch him do this. I would be like, he's really dumb. He's a dumb dog. He
Yeah,
doesn't realize that's him in the mirror. And then one day I realized that's not him in the mirror. That's not him. You and I, Eugene, I can see my image on the screen and you can see your
hmm
image on the screen, but that's not you. That's an image of you from, a couple of feet away. And they did this experiment with little children, like under 6 months old, and they would put them in front of a mirror. Okay. Then they would cover the mirror and they would put a spot on the child's face. Then they would lift the screen. For the first 6 or 7 months, the children were completely non-reactive. Then after 6 or 7 months, when they lifted the screen, the child would put their hand to the spot on their face. So at that point, they were recognizing that there was a link between the image they saw in the mirror and
yeah,
themselves. But before that, they didn't. Well, we get trained to believe that that image of self is who we are.
yeah.
And that's not true.
And we
You're
identify with the image in the mirror rather than with ourselves.
Well, yes, indeed. And I'd go further, from the moment we're born, who we are is who we are to ourselves from, 0 millimeters away. And then we get trained to believe that who we are is ourselves from a distance away, a third person view
Yeah,
of ourselves. But who you truly are to yourself is yourself from a first person perspective, from 0 meters away. And what I inevitably find though is that when people are struggling, when they think there's something wrong with them, and they think that they're not enough, the person they are thinking of is that third person view of themselves,
yeah.
that view of themselves, that experience of themselves through the eyes of others.
That
And
is
as
beautiful.
you wake up to the truth of who you really are, that falls away. My assertion, and I don't want anyone to take my word for any of this, like test it out in your own experience and evaluate it against your own history. But my assertion is that who we really are, who each of us really is that consciousness that's animating our being. And that consciousness is the source of 100% of the confidence and 100% of the peace and 100% of the love and security and joy and well-being that you're ever going to feel. And not only that, it's the source of all the love and peace and joy and fulfillment and well-being that you ever have felt. It's the only place that it has ever come from. I know it may have seemed like it may have come from another person or from an accomplishment or from a gift or from the sunshine or wherever you thought it came from. But my assertion to you is that it has always and only come from within. It always has, it always will. It's the only game in town. And what I've found, Eugene, is that when you lead a client into an experience of that for themselves, their world starts to transform.
Yeah,
And that looks to me like those are the principles behind transformational change,
beautiful.
waking up to the truth of who you really are and how experience is created.
And it's so, yeah, like I said in the beginning, that basically is, you know, the job of a coach, right? To actually help the client realize that they are okay, even though they said, I'm not okay, I have this problem, but helping them, like you said, lead them by the hand, educate them to have an insight.
Well, I go further. I'd say that to me that looks like uh, a a technical piece of the job and a perk of the job.
Yeah,
But the job of a coach is whatever you agree with the client that they're going to hire you to do. So if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I want help growing my business," well, I can give you an example. I had a guy came to me. He wanted to multiply his. He had a multi-million dollar, large multi-million
yeah,
dollar business. Wanted to grow it to a massive, billion-dollar business. So we had an intake conversation. And I was asking, he told me about his goals. And I said, what would that get you that you wouldn't otherwise have? What would that do for you that you wouldn't otherwise have? And he told me, and we dug into it for a few minutes. And where we got to was a deep feeling of connection. And he said, I'd be able to get to the end of my life and know that I've lived a life of purpose and have a feeling of peace and well-being, knowing I'd done what I'm here to do, knowing I'm, on track. And I said, okay, well, here's here I'm going to tell you something, and you'll know whether I'd be a good coach for you or not. He said, if you and me work together, we're going to get together for 3 days, and I'm going to show you how to have what you've just described now. You're going to
hmm
start from having that experience of peace and well-being and knowing that you're enough and knowing that you're okay. I said, and then from that point, you're going to create whatever you create. And that may be $1 billion brand, but you may decide to sell your business and travel the world with your family. And I can't tell you what's going to be important to you once you realize who you really are and how your experience is created. And he said, I'm in. But here's the thing, Eugene. He could have said, sorry, pal, I need a business coach to help me grow and I'd be like, fine, like, because that's how I work with people. I work on the basis that their goals get them to me, and we'll agree what we're going to work on and stuff. But I always put in there, if your perspective on reality changes, the goals that you've agreed today may be replaced by something more meaningful, more
yeah,
important, more, and who knows. So I have to build that into my coaching agreement, because that's at the heart of transformational change. The things that make sense to people as goals to be achieved and problems to be solved at one level of understanding look completely different from an elevated level of understanding.
totally, totally. And that's so beautiful. And sometimes, like I sometimes I also ask these kind of questions. And like you said yourself, some people say, hey, you know what? Screw that. I just want to get the $1 billion. I don't, it's like, yeah, I want to be contribute to the world and, world peace and all that stuff. Yeah, I like that. That's the core. But right now from you, I want you to help me get these results, period. And the fluff is after. And so sometimes people they like be trying to persuade me to give up on my goals or dreams and change them. It's like, no, you don't want to persuade. You just want to see what's beyond that, like you said yourself.
Yeah. Well, and I have a deep respect for the goals and objectives that bring someone to me. I have
Yeah.
a lot of respect for that. And I want to be super honest and crystal clear with people about how I work and what could change. Um, the other thing that I promised at the top of the session was that I'd share what I consider to be the most valuable question I have ever learned. And
Yes.
this ties back to your question about how do you lead someone into that place of deep connection and rapport and
Yeah.
into seeing who they really are. And so it's, calibration. And the question, the most valuable question I've found is a question I ask myself and that I encourage my coaches to ask themselves, which is, what must be true of them for them to say that, for them to do that, for them to believe that? So my client will tell me something, and I'm going, what must be true for them? Because I'm trying to elicit
hmm
their underlying reality. What are
hmm
they experiencing as true? And so the things that people say are a great clue to what they must believe to be true. So I'm always trying to, anything someone says, anything they don't say, anything they do, anything they believe, anything they respond, I'm trying to try to get underneath that and find, okay, what must they believe to be true? Because that's the raft
Yeah.
that they're sailing through life on, that they're navigating life on. And that's the thing. That's where we can find the edges and create the opportunities for transformational
So
change.
with the client you were talking about just now, basically when he said, I want to leave something behind, I want to contribute to the world, then when you ask them, so what must be true for you for that to be true, then
Well, no, this is a question I ask myself. As I'm listening to the client, I'm asking myself, what must be true of them for them to be saying that? So when he said to me, I want to build $1 billion business, I'm like, what must be true of them? Well, you must have some reason for wanting to do that. So I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, well, let's find out. Why do you want to do that? What would that do for you? So he starts telling me, well, this and that and the other. I'm like, oh, great. So now I've got a bunch more information. What must be true for him? So when by the time he got to, I would get to the end of my life knowing I've done what I was here to do and that I've lived a good life and I'll finally have a sense of
Mhm.
peace and fulfillment. Well, I knew that what must be true of him for him to say that is that he believes that he can't have that sense of fulfillment and well-being until he's accomplished a certain
Yeah.
amount of stuff. Now I know that that's not true, and so I know that that's going to make it harder for him to do whatever he wants to do in the world, because when we're operating with false assumptions about how the world works, it just makes life a little more difficult.
Yeah.
So it's an information gather. It's a navigation tool. Just asking yourself, what must be true of them for them to say that?
Mhm.
Helps you get at their underlying reality.
So, I'm just processing the information. So for me, it's kind of like the shortcut. People always set, it's like when you set yourself a goal, you actually set yourself a condition. Like you condition yourself like, hey, I can only be happy or fulfilled if this happens. So, whereas what you say is like, hey, be fulfilled and then this might happen.
Well, I'm not even saying that. I'm saying you have the capacity for fulfillment within you.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of unlinking
Yeah.
fulfillment from the outcome.
Yeah.
Now, what people sometimes say is, "Oh, but if I didn't believe that doing this would make me happy, then I'd never do anything." But that's not my experience. My experience is that the more people understand who they are and how their experience is created and where happiness and well-being and fulfillment truly come from, the more freedom they have to pursue what actually makes sense to them, what actually
Yeah.
inspires them, what they actually care about.
So beautiful. Wonderful. Wow, this has been a wonderful session. Thank you so much, Jamie, for making the time. It's been so beautiful and wholesome. I think that's like my own perception of this conversation we had. It has been wholesome. Where can people reach out to you? Where can they get in touch with you? Where can they learn more from you?
They can find me at jamiesmart.com. All my stuff's there, but I'm also in the usual places on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. My handle is jamiesmartcom. And my books are on Amazon. I've got podcasts on the on iTunes or the podcast network. So there's the Get Clarity podcast and the Thriving Coaches podcast.
Hmm.
But jamiesmart.com is the best place to find access to everything.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. It's been a joy and a pleasure. And everybody, what you have to do right now, I'm looking for a piece of paper, so I have it here. So what you have to do right now, you take a pen, you take a piece of paper, and write down the most important idea, the one that struck a chord with you from this presentation. Write it down. What was that one thing that you are left with after this amazing presentation from Jamie Smart? So put that down on paper, pen to paper. It's best always. And then if you care to share, share it in the Facebook group and let us know so we can learn from you as well. Jamie, thank you so much again. It's been a wonderful time to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eugene. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for making the time for me.
Thank you.